Got a little red in that tree. It's starting to change.
The cost of homes in the United States. President Donald Trump is allegedly declaring a national emergency on housing this fall that would put new homes in the market while also reducing the costs. Epic Times says this. President Donald Trump is thinking about declaring a national housing emergency in the fall. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent has said. And it notes in a Labor Day interview with the Washington Examiner, Bessent stated the administration is considering a list of measures to bolster supply and cut housing costs. And what does it mean to bolster supply? It means you build more homes or you free up existing homes and cut costs. A lot of ways to do that, including, they say, possible tariff exemptions on construction materials like wood or other materials and so on. It notes they're also studying tactics to standardize local building and zoning codes, the finance head said, which would be huge, by the way, because some states are crazy with local zoning and building codes.
Yeah,
In
like
California, it's
California.
very hard to build anything because there's so much red tape. If at the federal level they were to standardize this, say, okay, this is a federal issue now, I don't know if that would override local law. It probably face a lot of legal challenges on that. But if they can clear up the red tape, make it easier to build new homes, it would do a lot. Now, he said this as well, quote, we're trying to figure out what we can do, and we don't want to step into the business of states, counties, and municipal governments, he said. And he added, I think everything is on the table. He added the Federal Reserve potentially cutting interest rates this year would also help improve housing affordability. On that point, when they have interest rates cranked up like they do now, you probably don't want to buy a house. We allow a third-party organization, partly privately owned, to, of course, control interest rates in the United States, and they've been maintaining very, very, very high interest rates. They add this as well, though. Investors overwhelmingly expect the Fed to lower the federal funds rate, a key policy rate that impacts business, consumer, and business government borrowing costs later this month. Notably because Trump is actually firing members of the board of the Federal Reserve, something a lot of people question whether or not the President of the United States can do. The last one he fired refused to leave, and they sent in law enforcement to go and evict her basically from the Fed building. Now, they know this as well. It notes that mortgage rates typically track the 10-year Treasury yield, which is partially influenced by the Fed funds rate. Because a lot of people don't know this, typically the Fed follows a pattern in terms of inflation, deflation, raising interest rates, lowering interest rates. When they lower interest rates, you typically have an economic boom. When they raise interest rates, you typically have an economic bust. Now, what comes first, the chicken or the egg? Is the Federal Reserve causing the boom and bust cycle? And they do it on a pattern. Or is it because they're just responding to the market? You decide. But it is a fact often that, of course, the state of the economy reflects in the boom and bust cycle of inflation, deflation, and the raising and lowering of interest rates. Now, note this as well. According to Freddie Mac's primary mortgage market survey, the average 30-year fixed-rate mortgage was 6.56% for the week ending August 28, down 21 basis points from 1 year ago. And it's at Bessent, meanwhile, acknowledged that the administration can employ policies to ensure more families can purchase a residential property. Imagine that, being able to buy a home. He said, quote, we may declare a national housing emergency in the fall. Why does that matter? If they declare a national housing emergency, basically, when the president declares a national emergency, it gives the president the ability to basically use anything at their disposal. Donald Trump would have way more latitude to do basically anything to solve the crisis. On that point, he's declared a lot of national emergencies. We have an energy emergency. We have an emergency at the border. He's doing this kind of across the board for a lot of things because it basically gives him a lot of power. Now, some people criticize Trump for doing that, saying, you're ruling like a king. Trump says, well, hail to the king, baby, right? On this point, though, Trump has discussed some measures on this, some examples of what he wants to do. One of these, he's talking about opening up federal land for development. This is one of the issues, for example, they're talking about in Las Vegas. There's some pushback to that. Part of the pushback is saying, one of the reasons we have national parks and federally owned land like BLM land, Bureau of Land Management land. One of the reasons we have that is to preserve the beauty of the American frontier, and America has a lot of open land. Now, others say, yeah, preserve the national parks, but you got to put a cap on it somewhere. And they're arguing that the squeeze on territory effectively puts a squeeze on every other market. Now, from a business standpoint, you could say this is a type of price fixing, right? You're squeezing the market in order to maintain a certain value.
Yeah.
Now, remember, real estate is not just houses for people like you and I. Real estate is an investment property. Real estate is foreign holdings. Real estate is an asset for a lot of, investment firms and big businesses and real estate companies, including in other countries. Real estate is also a commodity being bought up by a lot of foreign buyers because they want to get their money out of their economies. And that's a big thing, especially with China, but actually in other countries like Canada, a lot of it's even people from India buying up properties and so on because they view it as investments. What happens when they buy up all the properties, though? Supply and demand. When you squeeze the supply, you create more demand, and when there's limited supply, high demand, the prices go up. Now, for banks, that's a fantastic thing. For investment firms, it's a fantastic thing. For people buying up all the properties, that is a fantastic thing because it means your investment has increased in value. The problem people have is when the property increases in value and you're not able to afford a house yourself, it means you can barely afford to live. And in some countries, especially Canada, it's reached a point where minimum wage, you really can't even own a house. In many parts of the U.S., it's that way. And so the argument is, well, should we open up construction of new homes? The problem is a lot of people do not want that to happen. The reason they don't want it to happen is because if you build more homes, it creates more supply, which means it lightens up demand, which means the value of the properties goes down. And for normal people, you're saying, great, I can buy a house now. It's like the 90s again when you could buy a house, having one. You can have a man and a woman married. The guy has to work, the woman doesn't, and you could still afford a house basically on minimum wage in the 90s. People are saying, hey, remember how great that was. The banks are saying, don't let it happen again, because for them, that means that the assets they've invested in have massively reduced in value. There are a lot of people who don't want that to happen. We'll see if Trump does it. Another big possibility, he could remove some of the red tape around building new homes. And aside from opening up federal land, this is also something they're talking about. If they remove the red tape to build new homes, that means it's easier to have new constructions. Notably, again, in places like California, it's a very big deal. Even the Palisades where you had the fires, they're not really building back. There's too much red tape.
No,
in fact, they're actually building like Section 8 housing now there, like affordable housing, welfare housing, basically. And so Hollywood may never be the same after those fires because of the red tape. There's also the possibility of cutting construction costs, materials. Trump says maybe they can use tariffs for that or lighten up tariffs, notably for places like Canada. They would love that. That would be a gift to Canada because we buy a lot of timber from Canada. One interesting thing with the United States, as opposed to actually a lot of other developed countries, we still build a lot of construction with wood. We use timber. If you go to Europe, a lot of countries in Europe, they build with, cement, they build with bricks, they build with, cinder blocks.
Stone.
They build with stone. America, we still build a lot with timber. Now, a lot of people say, well, why do you do that? It makes your whole country like a giant tinderbox, and when you have a fire, everything goes up in flames. We say, you know what, it's more cozy, and then we like our wooden houses. And for Canada, again, that would be a huge deal. If they can find a way to cut the cost of construction by lowering the cost of wood, That would be a massive gift to Canada because the tariffs are really squeezing them. That would open up a huge industry in Canada. They'd probably shift a lot to that because a lot of the other industries are being squeezed right now. If you have America get flooded in new materials, again, wood and other things, that of course makes it much cheaper to build a house because anybody who works in construction, you might have noticed, especially since COVID, the cost of timber really went up. There's also the possibility they can restrict foreign ownership of homes, which I don't know if they'll do because, Canada has done this. It is more controversial in the United States, but Canada has actually done this. They have laws in place to restrict foreign purchases of homes. Part of the reason for that in Canada is because they have a much lower supply. They have a lot more red tape with building new homes. Even more so than the United States. A lot of that in Canada is based around, environmental protection laws and so on. They don't want to open up areas for new construction. The result of that is they have basically a standardized supply of homes. The other problem they have is when they bring in foreign workers, they buy a home, their family members buy a home, their family members buy a home, and they do it through people here on like student visas and stuff. When they do that, you have foreign ownership of homes that are often unoccupied. They're sitting on them for real estate value, or as an investment. And the problem you have in Canada is that it's causing the prices of homes to skyrocket. Now, in response to that, they have noted in Canada, not in the United States, that mass migration, people from other countries, China, India, buying up homes has caused the housing market to be squeezed. They've restricted it. Will that happen in the United States? Probably not. I don't think they would do this because it would be too controversial. I think that Trump's stance on that is they want to just build more homes. It creates more jobs for the construction industry. They want to build that back. It creates more jobs for, again, foreign materials, timber, all the trade jobs, plumbing, HVAC, and everything else. It's fantastic on a business standpoint. Because you create multiple levels of jobs if you have construction. If they reopen that, that'll be great for the trades, especially now because they've opened up different programs now where you can even get Pell Grants for the trades. In fact, Department of Labor is really jumping on the Pell Grants for trades. They want to push that. If this would be a huge boost to that entire market. I think they're going to go that route personally. There's also the possibility they can restrict banks and investment firms buying up homes. I don't think they will do that because while you can accuse the banks of squeezing the market and the big investment firms of buying up all the single family homes and everything else, the other reality is a lot of the banks and investment firms also finance the massive construction projects. And while they're accused, and I'm on that boat as well, saying that they're squeezing the market, they also expand the market. They're also building a lot of the new construction. So I don't think they're going to change that. In my personal take, what we will probably see is this. The Trump administration will probably put more... The big problem you have in America is there's a squeeze on housing zoning. For example, they can zone for single-family homes. They can zone for condos. They can zone for apartments. There's been a squeeze on single-family homes. You have major investment firms just scooping up all the single-family homes, squeezing that market. The rate we're going, single-family homes are going to be just for rich people. They're making zoning only for apartment buildings and condos, multifamily homes. And as they do that, they're of course making it so there's more demand for the nice houses. You can have a yard, you can have the American dream and the white picket fence and the golden retriever. They're squeezing that whole market. If from the federal level they can bypass that and create federally designated, single-family home zoning areas, maybe if they free up government land and say this government land can people who can't afford a normal home and so on. It's the welfare of housing. In the New York City, we have a lot of that in the housing projects and so on. A lot of that apparently has been bought up by illegal aliens. They've been allowed to get it. Now, you can say, of course, what they've been saying for a long time. Well, in the United States, under American law, if you're not an American citizen, if you're an illegal alien, you cannot get welfare, you cannot get Section 8 housing. The way that different states have gotten around this is they mandate that you're not allowed to question a person's immigration status. So while you can say from the federal level it is illegal for an illegal alien to get food stamps, Section 8 housing, and Medicare and Medicaid and everything else, the way they get around this, again in California and New York and other places, they're not allowed to ask. So while it is illegal, they removed the checks and balances. And so because of that, a lot of illegal aliens have been able to get Section 8 housing on the cost of the American taxpayer. Hood's Secretary Scott Turner announced this on X on Friday, and he said this: beginning of the end for illegals living in taxpayer-funded housing starts now. The days of them getting cheap homes on the backs of American taxpayers are coming to an end, in other words. This is what the full notice from Hood says, Housing and Urban Development. They say within 30 days of receipt of this notice, Hood is requesting that every public housing authority, PHA, provide a full and comprehensive accounting of all tenants who are receiving a Section 8 voucher and or residing in Hood-founded housing. Hood is requiring the name, mailing address, number of bedrooms, the cost of the unit, and proof of American citizenship or eligible immigration status as defined by the law. One important thing here, notice as well, it says proof of American citizenship or eligible immigration status. This is suggesting that not only could illegal aliens get booted out of Section 8 housing, if you're not an American citizen and you're getting it, you might get booted out too, even if you're here on legal status otherwise. They note as well, quote, this information is required by law, and this administration is upholding the law to the fullest extent. Again, federal law versus state law. It's interesting the way they're doing this, because rather than go through the states and telling, New York and California, provide us a list of every person on Section 8 housing, and they'd probably say, take a hike, we're not allowed to work with you, because, they're sanctuary cities, and they mandate it so that they don't cooperate with immigration authorities at the federal level. They're going straight to the housing authorities. And because a lot of the money for this does come from the federal government, they have the authority for it. They're bypassing the states, going directly to the houses. Now look, no longer will illegal aliens be able to leave citizenship boxes blank or take advantage of Hood-funded housing, it says, riding the coattails of hardworking American citizens. And they add currently, Hood only serves 1 out of 4 eligible families due in part to the lack of enforcement of prohibition against federally funded assistance to illegal aliens. That's going to be a big topic too. That's going to be a huge topic, because you've seen these arguments, especially in poorer neighborhoods in New York City and elsewhere. A lot of residents have complained that illegal aliens are scooping up all the benefits. And when you have a pool of money and a pool of assets delegated to helping serve the impoverished of the United States, and a bunch of people, come across illegally and stick their hands into the pot, it means there's less to go around. There's a limited supply of, again, the handouts. And a lot of that has been reserved for Americans who are actually needy. When you have other people who shouldn't be here in the first place taking that money, taking those resources, it means that the Americans in need are left without what they need. It's a big deal, actually, and we will see where this goes. On that front, too, it could be that they find more illegal aliens and begin deporting them also, especially if they find that they've been living in Section 8 housing. Well, everyone, that's all for tonight. Thank you for joining us, and as always, please take care of yourselves, stay informed, and stay free.